Tonight, I've brought in a range of guests to help us understand the many sides of sustainable fashion. So we're going to look at issues of environmental responsibility, thinking about materials, production, processes, traceability, and waste. We're going to talk about social responsibility, thinking about ethics, health, and wages tied to labor and manufacturing. We're also going to look at business perspectives, the ways new technologies can potentially disrupt the norms of fast fashion. And through it all, what I hope we come away with is thinking about our role as consumers. What do we demand, and how can we share in the responsibility for what is produced? One of our goals tonight then, as part of the series, is to think about how fashion is changing, but also how businesses, brands, designers, and consumers can be a part of the changes that we see. I'm going to give you a little bit of a roadmap for tonight. We have two guests who are actually going to give presentations, and then we're going to shift gears to a moderated discussion. And I want to introduce everyone up front. You have programs that have their full bios, but I want to introduce the guests in the order in which they will speak. First, we're going to hear from Todd Copeland, who is the Environmental Responsibility Manager for Patagonia, where he implements and manages programs to reduce environmental impacts within Patagonia's global supply chain. Following Todd, we'll hear from Marcy Zaroff, who coined the term eco-fashion back in the 90s, and is an internationally recognized eco-lifestyle entrepreneur, educator, innovator, and expert. After Marcy speaks, I will sit down with our two other guests, Nairi Corby and Aurora James. Nairi is a female entrepreneur who founded Fame and Partners, a contemporary made-to-order fashion label disrupting the fashion industry with personalized, sustainably produced garments. And finally, Aurora James is founder and creative director of Brothers Vellies, where she collaborates on the ground with African artisans to discover new inspirations and create sustaining jobs in local communities. Before we actually start the program and hear from Todd, we're going to screen a short film, about 5 minutes, that was executive produced by Marcy Zaroff, one of our guests. And it touches on many of the issues that our guests are going to discuss tonight and kind of helps us set the stage. So with that, we will watch Thread.
I'm Amber Valletta. I'm a model, I'm an actress, I'm a mother, an entrepreneur. What started the journey in discovering eco-fashion and sustainability and responsible manufacturing began a long time ago. I grew up in nature. My grandparents had a farm in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Days and hours spent playing outside. Those were the beginnings and the roots of my understanding of nature, my compassion for the world around me, and living in harmony with those things and not trying to conquer them, but be a part of them. Definitely when I first started modeling and traveling the world, there was a big conflict for me. And I started seeing the different wastes, the different issues with people's rights, workers' rights. Obviously, I knew about environmental issues because it's been a topic for years. So I've been seeking these solutions and asking these questions. And fashion is such a creative force in the world. It is such an expression of who we are. They say you are what you eat, but you are as much what you eat as what you wear. It tells a story. Let's tell a positive story. And the fashion industry has the power to do that. So I started connecting the dots. What I'm proposing is like, can we do this better? Can we lift poverty? Can we lift the way we treat people in the rest of the world that are producing these material objects for ourselves? Can we farm better? What I'm seeing in fashion that's happening is people are starting to wake up and realizing that we have to be more creative. So I've been connecting with all sorts of people in the fashion industry, entrepreneurs, business owners, about this kind of way of thinking. And I think you're seeing people think about it on a much bigger scale with beautiful design being a part of it, but also where we source our raw materials. And I think that is what we actually have a handle on.
So Susie, James, tell us a little bit about the red carpet green dress.
Red Carpet Green Dress is a global dress design contest. And the criteria is that it's an Oscar-worthy gown or tux, as of this year, made out of completely sustainable fabrics. But the things that I've been able to uncover, it's not really just about a pretty dress. We all wear clothes every single day, and the way clothes are dyed and milled and manufactured are not only devastating to our biosphere, our planet, but also to our bodies. So the toxins from the dyes are actually seeping through our skin. So the tux is actually made of a fabric that's made of recycled plastic bottles. And
same as this.
Yes.
This is the same fabric.
Yep.
And it's fantastic, yeah.
Yeah, it's great.
Still have some class and some glamour. You know, we can still have some fun in life. We just have to live as conscious beings on this planet.
I'm Rick Ridgway, the Vice President of Environmental Affairs at the clothing company Patagonia. The impacts of the apparel industry on the environment are pretty huge. Apparel is like the third or fourth biggest ingredient in landfills these days. The impacts of the manufacturing of clothing, especially the impacts of the fibers, whether they're naturally grown or synthetic. It begins with the fibers themselves, whether the cotton's organically grown. Cotton, that accounts for 35% of all the insecticides and pesticides on planet Earth, as grown traditionally, is something to avoid. Whether the wool is from sheep that are sustainably pastured. So this is the fabric web. This represents the closed loop technology we have for polyester, where clothes made out of polyester come back to us from our customers. They go into machines that chemically recycles the polyester into new polyester pellets that is made into new polyester clothes. With many of the fabrics that we've developed over the years, we will keep this as a proprietary fabric for 1 to 2 years. But we're willing to let that go in trade for significant improvement to the textile industry on a global level.
Now, more than ever before, the amount of positive engagement is super exciting. The Global Organic Textile Standard, which is now going into its 4th revision, has great information on what a platinum certification for an organic textile would look like, and everybody is sharing conversation, coming together to figure out how can we shift the paradigm on this industry.
The most exciting is creating eco-fabrics. So we take the same technologies that Patagonia have created in environmentally friendly fibers, and we're taking those fibers and we're turning them into fashion. So it's the same materials in an eco-polar fleece. How do we make a dress out of it? So that's really the future, and it's really exciting.
So there are a lot of cellulosic fibers that are being developed, such as eucalyptus, which is a fiber that's extracted from eucalyptus. It's an amazing fiber and an amazing story. In addition to that, you have recycled poly. Is plastic bottles taken out of landfills, broken down, spun into yarn, and that is being woven into all kinds of fabrics and fibers. They took 900 million bottles out of landfills last year to make their yarns. So it really is making a difference.
To reach this holy grail of sustainability is a big basket of solutions and innovation. Little by little, things are shifting. So we're getting there.
Okay. All right, so first up is Todd Copeland from Patagonia.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Todd Copeland from Patagonia. I'm really happy to be here, so thank you for the invitation. That movie was awesome. It's the first time I've seen that, so thanks, Marcy. That was really good. You heard a little bit from Rick Ridgway, who's VP of Environmental Affairs at Patagonia, and you saw a little bit about the stuff that we're doing. I am going to focus tonight on supply chain. It's what I do right now. I've been at Patagonia for 11 years, and my current focus is looking at the environmental impacts in our manufacturing operations, measuring those impacts and reducing those impacts. So, me find the clicker and we'll get going. It's not me skiing, but that is an awesome, awesome picture, and I wish I was doing that right now. But second to that, I wish I was here, so things are good. A little bit about Patagonia as a company. So this is a panel where I'm representing the big company, which I would say we're a medium-sized company. Even in the outdoor space, we're kind of mid to large. We are cresting at $1 billion in sales a year, which is really amazing for us. We've been growing a lot. I would say the growth is coming not from us going into new markets or trying new avenues or advertising a lot. The growth is mainly coming from more customers looking for a brand that has values that resonate with them. So I feel really good about that. We sell stuff through wholesale, like at REI. We sell stuff at our own stores, at Patagonia stores, and we sell through the websites. And so just a little bit about kind of how many people we have, the different companies that are operated under our umbrella. We are still privately held, which lets us do some crazy stuff and make decisions that a public company might not be able to make. And we actually have incorporated as a benefit corporation and certified as a B Corp. So that means that our purpose is not just to make a profit, but it's to be useful to society and to actually help solve the environmental crisis and make a profit. So, and one of the, actually this number is updated now. We have donated and granted over $100 million since we started giving money away as part of our business model in 1985. So we're really proud of that. Basically, the more money we make, the more money we give away. So this is our mission statement. Everybody lives and breathes by this. Everybody in the company knows this. It starts with best product, but we want to cause no unnecessary harm, and we want to inspire other companies, and we want to address the fact that we are in an environmental crisis that needs to be solved. So, when we talk about supply chains, this is the most basic kind of model that you've probably seen of representing a supply chain. So maybe it's good as a visual to start this conversation. So you know I'm talking about everything from raw material extraction, whether it's a farm or an oil well, to consumer use. This is not really the reality. This is extremely simplified. So I'll tell you, this is a little more like what it looks like. We have, let's say, 1,000 different products that we sell every season, and those different products have different supply chains. So each product is going to go through some different process and made at different factories and take a different course through this web. In general, what this represents is us on the very end of retailing and being a brand. What we call Tier 1, which are factories that assemble materials into finished products, and the subcontractors that do other things for them, like wash it or cut it. And then there's a whole level of making materials, starting with a finished material, dyed, coated, you know, whatever, finished, back to how do you actually make that fabric, weave it, knit it, whatever. Going back into what I'm calling Tier 3 here, which is fibers and making kind of the precursor for producing textiles, and then a Tier 4 of raw materials, which is the oil or the cotton right out of the field or something like that. And then, just for fun, we wanted to show chemicals on the bottom, and these go into every step of the process, and the supply chain from the chemical manufacturing is just as complex. You have people that sell chemicals, and then you have people that blend chemicals, people that actually make chemistry, and then the raw materials, again, coming from oil or minerals or something like that. So whenever we talk about doing something ethical or a social initiative, or we're going to measure an environmental impact or improve the environmental footprint, the reality is that we have to do that in this web of a supply chain. And just to understand what the supply chain is the first step. And I would say it's really difficult to do that. So we're trying to do as good as we can to understand what we're using, because it's always changing, and what are the impacts there. And we can't spend our whole life measuring, because we actually have to make change. So before we know all the facts, we have to start acting. All right, so how do we communicate this complexity to our suppliers? We have what's called the Footprint Chronicles. This is not new. It's been around for a long time. When we first did it, it was new. And nobody else was doing this. And I feel like we've pushed the envelope on transparency of supply chain by putting this on our website. You can click on a dot and learn more about that supplier, whether it's a textile mill or it's a finished goods cut and sew factory. We got a little bit of statistics up here and maybe a picture. And then when you get to the product page, any product, you can scroll down and see who's involved in making that product. And it's not every single component, but it's the main materials and it's the final assembly, and then you can learn a little bit about this. So some people will argue that this is proprietary, that they don't want to share their supply chain information, and I would argue that this is actually not proprietary at all, as you can see, because we're showing everybody where all our stuff is made. You can go to these people. We think they're good suppliers, and feel free to use them to make stuff. We will still be able to innovate our own materials and products because we have our own design and we have our own developers. So that's the proprietary part. This is sustainability in our supply chain that we want to share. So how we kind of manage supply chain at Patagonia, we have what's called a fourfold approach. And internally, everybody knows what fourfold approach means, but it's super vague, right? What it is it's looking at not just business capabilities of a supplier, which would be the typical things of like, can they make what you want to make? Can they deliver it on time? Is it a good price? So we also look at quality. We're really sticklers on quality. Has to be the best. And beyond that, which are maybe the interesting sustainable legs here, are social and then chemical and environmental. And we all work together. So any new supplier has to be approved by all four folds. And existing suppliers are constantly evaluated by all four folds. If there's a problem with one of the folds, it becomes a problem for all the folds. And we're going to leverage the others, including the business people, to make sure that our suppliers are addressing all areas. And only in a case where we really can't make improvements would we actually leave a supplier in a responsible way and find a new supplier. And we're going to find a new supplier who can meet all four of our folds of requirements. And these requirements are global. They apply to everybody. We have our own internal standards. And it doesn't matter if we're looking at a factory that manufactures in the US or Bangladesh or France or China, global standards. So I think that's really unique, by the way. And I don't know of any other companies that do that. And I feel like the fact that we have equal place at the table to talk about all four of those things when we talk about supply chain is really, really important for us to have a good supply chain. So into the details a little bit, we have about 85 finished goods factories, the factories that make our products and do sub-processes for making those products. I would say over 150 material suppliers. We have a really good grasp of about the suppliers that make probably the top 90% by value of all our materials. The last 10% is a little bit harder to get to. We have a very long tail of manufacturers that make maybe one button or one little fabric that goes in a pocket. And we try to consolidate as much as we can, but that's kind of the reality. And then we go all the way to farms. So looking at, tracing where cotton, down, wool, hemp, any farm-based material comes from. Sometimes the impacts are the biggest all the way back at the beginning. And here's an example. So back in the early 90s, Patagonia saw that some of the biggest impacts were actually in farming cotton. Of all the materials we made, of all the stuff we did, that seemed in an environmental assessment that we did, which was groundbreaking at the time, that pesticide application, fertilizer runoff, and those types of issues were actually the biggest impact in our entire supply chain. So that drove us to investigate organic cotton. What is organic cotton? How do we use organic cotton? How do we develop a supply chain that can process organic cotton? And by 1996, all of our products were using organic cotton. So it was a very difficult switch. And we tried to communicate that to our customers with this catalog essay by telling them why we did it. Because they don't know. Like, people don't know why we went through all this trouble, but we saw there was a problem and we tried to implement a solution and we bring the solution to market. We had to go back and explain why we did that. So we've been doing that for a long time. Now we use all kinds of things, the website, we make films, we do social media. All those are ways to educate our customers and consumers and the public in general about the issues that we know about and why we're trying to solve them. Impacts of manufacturing. So I wanted to talk about this a little bit, which is kind of between the cotton fields and, you know, the garments on the rack in the store. There are some, and this is where I spend most of my time now, is focusing on these impacts of manufacturing. And I just wanted to go through a few in general. Water scarcity is a huge issue. It's a local issue, but in a lot of places where we're manufacturing, it is an issue. And when you're processing textiles, you have to use a lot of water to add color or to add any kind of functionality to the fabric. You do it wet, and that water has to be drinking water quality, because otherwise you have quality issues. So we're literally competing with the local people for drinking water. And when we're done with it, we discharge it. And if we put all these chemicals in there to try to get it on the fabric, it's not 100%. So the rest of it goes out in the wastewater. And of course we can treat the wastewater and we can clean it up, but in developing countries, it's still, the norm is to just discharge it without treatment, which is a real problem for the communities. Energy use, well, this is a great picture, but you know, typically where we're manufacturing, we need energy that's fueled by fossil fuels, coal, natural gas, whatever that is. If we could put solar panels up, I think we're starting to make the progress. It's not always an option. Like I said, it depends on the location. It depends on the process. Some processes are not going to be able to actually operate with electricity. It's going to need some kind of on-site fuel combustion. So then you're looking at things like biofuels to really drive energy use away from fossil fuels. And one of the results of burning fossil fuels is air emissions, like greenhouse gases, as well as, you know, particulates of carbon. And you can actually have air emissions coming from other things as well, like solvent use or other processes that are going to cause small fibers or dust or things like that, which can be an issue for in the factory, for the workers in the factory. It can be an issue for the communities around the factory, or in the example of greenhouse gases, it's a global issue. Oops, I skipped one. And then waste. So if you think about just the cutting process, just one process of making a piece of clothing, typically you're only getting, let's say on average, 80% yield. So 20% of your fabric's on the floor. And so you can imagine that in every step of the process before that, you've got some amount of loss. And it's really an unacceptable way for us to do business in a world of kind of reducing resources. We're going to have to figure a way to eliminate waste and recycle the waste that we do create. So those are the problems, some of the solutions, and how we're working on it. Obviously, Patagonia can't solve these problems by ourselves. We try. But we have to collaborate. These are huge problems. We could clean up one factory, but if you cannot be a clean fish in a dirty pond, I think is a good way of saying it. So a lot of these things are going to cascade from, maybe we're only buying 20% of the production of a factory. Maybe that's not enough to convince them to put solar panels on their roof or do something that we need them to do. So we're going to collaborate with the other brands that are buying stuff from that factory to influence them. Maybe it's a community water treatment plant for that factory plus 100 factories around it. We can make one good factory, but how do we influence that wastewater treatment plant? Then we need even more people collaborating to influence them. Maybe it's the government. Maybe the government is not, it doesn't have strict enough regulations or strict enough enforcement. How are we going to influence the government? Now we need even more level of collaboration. So this is probably the most important thing that we do. And one example of that is the Sustainable Apparel Coalition. So you saw Rick Ridgway. He is, quote, the grandfather of the SAC. Patagonia is one of the founding members of the SAC. And the idea is that we come up with as an industry, a standardized way of measuring the footprint or the sustainability of the products that we make. So factories as well as products. And we roll that all up and communicate that to customers, and then people can make an educated decision. So trying to get people information, comparative information, that they can make better buying decisions based on. So that is the idea. There are different modules that go through the whole life cycle of the product, from design to manufacturing and logistics to retail, what we do as brands, and all the way to kind of considering end of life. And in the end, the goal is to have some kind of labeling on the product. So there are some examples of what's happening right now. The EU has done a pilot on labeling footwear with an environmental score. It kind of looked like this. This is totally a mock-up, but and the SAC was involved as one of the organizations doing this pilot. And the idea is to actually influence EU regulation on how products are going to be labeled for their footprint. And in France, they've kind of already gone on the path and passed a law, although for our industry is voluntary, on labeling the environmental impact of products. So next step, by 2020, the Higg Index will have a label. This is our industry voluntarily putting the information on the product that says, here's the footprint of the product, so that it's done in the right way. And we can show the governments that we want to do this. We want to level the playing field. We want to educate customers about their purchasing choices. So a lot of opportunity here in what this is going to look like and how it's going to be communicated, because as I just mentioned, there's a lot of complex things that are going to go into this label. I can't stop without talking about human impacts of manufacturing as well. So this is obviously a big thing. When you talk about making clothes, robots and machines don't make clothes. People make clothes. A lot of people make clothes. So, and if you talk about farming, back at the farming impacts, you also have a lot of labor and human opportunities for human rights issues. So this is something that we certainly address as well. The way that Patagonia is currently going beyond what I think we have done in the past is that we're partnering with Fair Trade USA to do fair trade sewing and fair trade products. This is essentially trying to get to paying a worker in a sewing factory a living wage, not just a minimum wage, not just a legal wage, but a living wage. So this is the mechanism by which we're doing it. People kind of resonate. So when we communicate fair trade sewing, people kind of know the label. They're like, oh, it's like the chocolate. I get it. It's really hard to talk about these types of issues to consumers. And I really think fair trade has done a good job of doing that. And so we're currently partnering with them to bring that message over into the apparel world. Just in general, how it works, we pay a premium for every product that we buy from a factory. That premium doesn't go to the managers of the factories. It goes to a group of workers who have been elected by the workers to decide what the workers want to do with that money, so that it doesn't just go to the factory manager and it doesn't go to Patagonia. It goes to the workers. So this is a way of getting more money or more resources to some of the lowest paid workers in the world. So in general, since we're at a university, I wanted to throw up the kind of classic profitability environment and society. This is kind of how we think about triple bottom line. This is the textbook definition of sustainability, and so when I'm talking about supply chain, this is exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to make sure that our company is profitable, our suppliers are profitable, and we all have healthy businesses while benefiting society and the environment. And I would say more and more, what we do for the environment and what we do for society is actually driving healthy business. And this triangle kind of is starting to flip around, where I think we are more focusing on the right things to do and then letting the success come, because when people see that, they really react to that. It's really resonating. So that's pretty much all I had to say. I will stop, and I hope there's lots of times for questions later. So thank you very much.
Okay. So thank you all for being here. Thank you, Alison, for bringing me here. I'm Marcy Zaroff. And this is my world. I've been in the world of sustainability for about 27 years. So that would make me, that would have made me about 3 when I started. And as Alison alluded, I actually coined the term eco-fashion in the mid-90s. I actually started my career not in fashion. So people say to me, so what's your background in fashion? And my answer is, I got best dressed in high school. So if that counts. I actually always loved fashion. It was just a personal passion of mine. But I did go to business school, and I was the kid with the lemonade stand growing up. But I was introduced to the brand Aveda when I was very young, and it struck a chord in me. It showed me that there's more to what we see when we look at consumer products, that if you pull the curtain back, you can tell a story of what's in and how products are made. That really, that was the epiphany that sort of launched my career. When I graduated from business school, the first business I started was called the Institute for Integrative Nutrition. Today, it's the world's largest nutrition school and has certified over 75,000 people worldwide as health coaches. I then learned that through my relationship with Aveda and my friendship with the founder, that there was an interconnection between food and beauty products, and opened the first Aveda Concept Salon in New York in the school. And then I was studying agriculture, and through understanding food and beauty products, I became exposed to the fact that, as Todd spoke to, that cotton is actually one of the most heavily sprayed industries in agriculture, and one of the biggest users of chemicals and toxic ingredients, and it's actually called the dirtiest crop in the world. And that really opened my eyes. So I rolled my sleeves up and saw that there was this missing link in that wellness equation. I started this movement with the idea of how can I revolutionize the fashion industry through education, inspiration, innovation, and collaboration. And so I started a brand called Under the Canopy in 1995, which was the first sustainable fashion and home brand. And that started my journey, which of course the journey of 1,000 miles, that's over 20 years ago now. This industry has come a very long way. So when I started, there we go. When I started, we're gonna go back to doesn't wanna go. But I'll talk to the problem. The problem was that there were 3 things. First, there was a stigma that was attached to sustainability and to fashion in general. When you would say those 2 words together, when you say eco-fashion, people would look at you like you were crazy. Like those 2 worlds don't go together. Ecology is about what's behind the scenes and in the soil, the ecosystem, what our products or what our planet is all about. And of course, fashion was all about the material world and what it looks like. So the stigmas were that that those 2 worlds were mutually exclusive, that you had to give up style to think about being, products and fashion that was good for the environment and good for human health. The second stigma was that you had to pay a lot more. And what I learned early in my career was that I could get into the trenches and actually build supply chains that were very efficient. And I couldn't go to a factory when I started my career and just buy a full package product. So, you know, I'm probably one of the few people that remembers that essay back in the mid-90s from Patagonia, because we were kind of in those trenches together. But by working with farmers, it was kind of unheard of in the fashion model. The fashion model at that time was, you know, and today even, you know, a garment can change hands 7 to 10 times, and people are buying at that full package, that final factory level. So by being vertically integrated, I could be efficient and I could add value to my products. And the third stigma was, how do you really know? Which was all about looking at the certification model. So I was actually on the team of people in the 90s that wrote the first organic fiber standard for America, which became ultimately a collaboration globally that is known today as the Global Organic Textile Standard. I lost a couple slides there. Let's see if I can. So we don't want to go there, but solution. Not sure what's up, but solution. Okay, first of all, I'm on the board of directors of the Organic Trade Association, which is a good business model, right? The organic industry. How many of you have bought organic food? Every one of you. Okay, so today, 84% of American consumers are buying organic food. And the interconnection of understanding, you can't really support one part of the equation without the other, because the main methodology of organic agriculture is crop rotation. So the crops are rotated together. And so when I learned this and I started to see that, you know, the organic food industry, which today is the fastest growing area of agriculture, growing at over double-digit rates for 20 consecutive years, where supply can't even meet the demand. We have 12% demand in America. We have about 5% supply, which means we're actually importing 7% of organic products just to meet today's demand. So making that parallel and connecting the dots into fiber was a big part of the solution. Good business. I mean, I know we kind of are losing on this slide a little bit, but you know, Todd talked about the people, planet, profit. I would also add passion and purpose to that. My favorite quote is from a book called The Prophet, which is from Khalil Gibran, that work is love made visible. So if you love your work, it's not work, it's love. And that the idea for building a successful business model in my book, as someone who has a business degree, was about good business. Good business is about building win-win business models, where you're not exploiting and destroying, you're actually working together to find solutions to create a better world, and ultimately everybody in the supply chain, all the way from the farm to the consumer, is benefiting. That little chart at the bottom there shows you that not that long ago, what we call the conscious products industry was a $200 million industry. And projections now are showing that by 2020, this is going to be a $1.6 trillion industry. So this is definitely a one-way street and a direction we're all going. So I looked at how can design change the world. I started, as I said, at the source, building relationships with the farmers and realizing 60% of the cotton plant is actually going back into the food stream, and that cotton, less than 3% of the world's agriculture is cotton, but almost 20% of the most harmful insecticides, up to 10% of the most toxic pesticides are being used in the cotton industry. And that doesn't even include all the processing and the finishing, the bleaching and the finishing and all the things that are added, all the chemicals that are added. So I got into the trenches to build relationships with my farmers, as I mentioned, to create the Under the Canopy brand. All the way from farm to finished fashion. Now, I'm a storyteller, right? So you're all, many of you might be communication majors here, I would suspect. To me, you know, you have to have that substance behind the story. But at the end of the day, if you can add value to products and you can tell a great story, and this is before the internet, to me, that was sort of a natural no-brainer, right? It's about great product, and it's about giving people what they love and seek without compromise to the environment, to farmer and worker welfare, or to future generations. And that was always the model with Under the Canopy. As Todd spoke to, transparency was really at the helm, you know, inherent in my brand from the beginning. From Fair Trade certification, I spent 7 years actually writing that certification with Fair Trade USA, being a part of the Global Organic Textile Standard, And these are a number of the certifications. And when I said that third stigma is about how do you really know? Well, I'm a big believer in third-party certification because you really, if you have transparency and you can follow a product and it's traceable from the farm up, that can make a big difference so that you can pull the curtain back and you can trust that the products that you're buying, or in my case, the products that I was selling, that people would believe and know that they're the real deal. And that also goes with authenticity. Then it's about making some noise and connecting the dots from source to story. So back in the 90s, we started partnering up with other companies. This is the Spiegel catalog, which many of you probably have never heard of. This is Whole Foods. We actually were the first brand to launch textiles into Whole Foods Market in 2005. And this was a 2,000 square foot under the canopy store in store. So I actually wrote the business plan for Whole Foods to get into textiles. We subsequently have launched in Bed Bath & Beyond, in Macy's, in Nordstrom, and Aveda Worldwide, and many other retailers. So the power of partnering with major retailers and having that authenticity and that transparency, as Todd showed you that chart about all the layers in the supply chain, you try explaining that to a major retailer or brand that they have to now not only go through that in their typical business model, but now you have to add sustainability into every step of the way. It's not easy. So from the standpoint of impacts, 10% of the world's carbon impact is coming out of the fashion industry. 3 trillion gallons of fresh water are used a year. Textile waste over 5% of the world's landfills. And the list goes on and on. 20% of fresh water pollution comes from textile treatment and dyeing. Kind of lost that stat at the end, but this is just the beginning. I mean, when you really pull the curtain back, and that's why I produced the film, the documentary film series. You saw one of the short films. If you want to see the rest, they are online. So you can Google that or go to L Studio to see them. And then there's Fashion Revolution Day. How many of you have heard about Fashion Revolution Day? Good. Awesome. So in April of 2013, how many of you are aware of the Bangladesh Rana Plaza tragedy, right? 1,133 people lost their lives in a moment because of the working conditions, and no matter what they tried to communicate, they just were unheard. And so that is just unacceptable. And the whole industry, as well as consumers worldwide, now in over 90 countries around the world, have come together to celebrate and to drive fashion forward through Fashion Revolution Day. Just the beginning. There's a lot of momentum behind the scenes, and we really need to shift the paradigm of this industry. I mean, I believe fashion is the most powerful vehicle in the world for transformation, because if you can appeal to people at a visceral level and tell that story, I mean, who doesn't love fashion, right? That's why people are obsessed with fashion magazines and who's wearing it on the runway, and because, you know, it's the beauty and that aesthetic that drives people at the beginning, but then take them deeper and tell that story about who made my clothes, where is it being made, you know, how's it being made, what's in my products. And it's interesting, for so many years, people weren't thinking about that with fashion. They're thinking about it to this day, a lot of people around food. But still, when I talk to people about the impacts of the fashion industry, it's still like, what? You know, oh, I never thought of that. But remember, our skin is the largest organ in our body. It's our primary organ for absorption. We're pretty much wearing textiles 24/7. And the fashion industry is the second largest polluter in the world, second to coal. So why is it now moving forward finally? Well, these are kind of a couple of the main reasons. One, lifestyle. You know, as most of you raise your hands on organic food and being more conscious about the choices that you're making. We're going to go into the rise of health and wellness. Spas have even shifted. Spas are no longer all about indulgence. Today, most spas are thinking about how can we make you heal you and make you feel better. Of course, the millennial generation, and most importantly, the internet, right? The internet now, you can pull the curtain back, you can ask the questions, and you can unveil those human and environmental impacts. So, you know the brands and the products that you're supporting and that you're buying. It makes a huge difference. Collaboration and innovation, another huge driving force. I mean, this is just a small snapshot, but you know, every day new collaborations are springing up. Prince Charles even just launched a sustainable cotton initiative that I think 34 major brands have already signed on to. There are just all over the place, from the Sustainable Apparel Coalition to the Textile Exchange to the Organic Fiber Council of the Organic Trade Association now. The Cradle to Cradle Innovation Institute has launched the Fashion Positive Initiative, which is focusing on the waste issue in fashion and looking at the circular economy. Canopy focuses on looking at the forests and making sure that we're not cutting down old forests and that we're protecting the rainforests of the world, which are providing the oxygen that we depend on and that we need to breathe and survive. So with all of these issues in the industry and having exited under the canopy, my current venture is a company called Metaware. This is a 40,000 square foot factory in Virginia. My vision was to bring manufacturing back to America. So it's kind of pick a card, you know, fair trade, fair labor, organic, cradle to cradle, made in the USA, and we make sustainability easy. So we take the excuses away from brands and retailers who want to do things more sustainably and just say, hey, this is too daunting, it's so complicated, I don't know how to navigate the supply chain or the certifications. We've got all the certifications baked into our platform, and we basically are plug and play sustainable fashion, similar to being the Intel inside to fuel the movement. So we also provide LCAs and communicate. Again, our whole thing is source to story. So we spoon feed our customers with storytelling, with communication opportunities. And even with that, we're doing collaborations. So we have Hanky Panky by Metaware that's being launched in a few months. For those of you who might know Hanky Panky, the underwear brand. We have Alma Mater by Metaware. And I don't know if USC might actually be one of the schools we just produced on Amazon now. So it's all organic, made in the US, with a college licensing company. And many, many more collaborations that are starting to come out. We got a lot lost in translation here. Okay, so I'm going to just flip through on the statistics. And this is, again, connecting the dots from farm to finished product to get the word out that people should know how they are very much interconnected in agriculture, and how we can drive things forward using all kinds of innovation. So at Metaware, as an example, we have a seaweed-based printing process that actually is free of all harmful chemicals. And a GOTS certified product, by the way, has no toxic chemicals, not just at the farm level where things are certified organic, but there is no chlorine bleach, there's no formaldehyde, there's no heavy metals, and other toxic chemicals that are in a lot of the products that are out there today. And this is just an example of some of the fashion that we've produced at Metaware. And if you're not familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals, please do check them out. I'm not going to go into detail, but you know, our whole industry now is focused on, you know, being about solutions. And I put this quote up because I love it from Yvonne. You know, agriculture has the potential to save life on Earth as we know it, and that is because soil is actually one of our greatest solutions to climate change, as it can sequester carbon from the atmosphere. So as we're now all witnessing climate change in a very serious way, despite what our government says, we will, you know, we have an opportunity now to start expanding organic agriculture and regenerative agriculture to build the soil, build the health of the soil, which has been really severely compromised through conventional and chemical agriculture, and start to rebuild the soil and capture the carbon out of the atmosphere through soil. And organic is a big solution to that. And telling our story through social media, telling our story through education and awareness, and telling our story through lots and lots of media opportunities. There's no better story to tell. And you know, as you saw Susie And also Livia Firth is doing a lot on the runways. And this is just a sample of some of the websites that are currently out there today that are curating sustainable fashion, making it easy. So when people say, well, where do I get it? Probably one of the biggest roadblocks to this movement today is either a lack of accessibility or just a lack of being in the know. Where do I go to get this? When people are, once they learn. And there's a lot of great brands out there, as well as a lot of great websites to check out. And then just finally, I have a book coming out next year called Eco Renaissance, Co-Creating a Stylish, Sexy, and Sustainable World. We have to make sustainability sexy and fashionable. And the book goes into all the different lifestyle choices, food, fashion, beauty, art, business, connecting all these dots and showing you that creativity, collaboration, connection, consciousness, and community are all the driving forces of this transformation and this rebirth of humanity, this renaissance, this eco-renaissance that I hope you'll all be a part of if you're not already. So thank you.
So we're all going to come up now and switch gears, and I'm going to talk to Aurora and Nairi. And I'm going to start with Aurora.
Hi, guys.
And talk about, so we just had some sort of big picture overviews, and now we're going to talk to two entrepreneurs who have started their own brands. Aurora James has Brothers Velis. And can you talk a little bit about the inspiration for your brand and going to Africa and working with artisans?
Yeah. So I started Brother Velis in January 2013, and it was basically an accident. I was traveling through Africa. The first place I ever went was Nigeria, and then Morocco and South Africa. And I just started visiting like workshops because I wanted to see what the artisans there were doing. And you know, my mom traveled very extensively with me when I was a child, and she has this amazing love affair with different cultural clothing. And so I was raised with an appreciation for that. And when I was visiting these artisans, I was realizing that there was no work for them because everyone in the local community wanted to wear like whatever they were seeing on TV, like whatever the Kardashians were wearing, whatever Kanye was wearing. And I was like, geez, like what you guys are doing is so much more amazing than anything that I have access to in New York. And a lot of it's inspired by what you guys are actually doing. So like, how can I help you thrive? And I had like, you know, like $3,500 saved at the time, and I worked with one workshop to sort of tweak this shoe that they had, which was a traditional South African felschoen, or felly, or as we call it, veli. And you know, we made some changes to the shape. I went to the tannery and tweaked the color a little bit, and I took, you know, the money that I had and I spent it and brought a bunch of shoes back and sold them at the Hester Street Fair, and then used that money and got more shoes. And we've essentially been doing that same thing, but now it's Net-a-Porter instead of the Hester Street Fair, which is great.
Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about the different workshops? You're in 5 different countries in Africa?
So right now we produce in South Africa, Kenya, Morocco, and Ethiopia. And then we also source extensively from Burkina Faso, Mali, Nigeria, within Africa. So that's where we're working.
Okay. And talk a little bit about the connection with the UN.
Yeah, so when I first started, it was like literally like I was in Africa, like making shoes with everyone. And as we started scaling, I was like, okay, this isn't like viable anymore, because we were starting with like, you know, a few hundred, and now when you're going to thousands, it's like a completely different ball game. So I reached out to the UN just like randomly one day. I was like, hello, I don't know if like anyone here cares about shoes, but I'm having some problems and I need some help. And someone wrote me back. Sounds crazy. First I didn't get a response actually, and then I heard that there was this guy doing this talk, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna go. And I went, and there was a huge line to talk to him, and I started to cry. And then I sent another follow-up email to my first one, and he wrote back and was like, meet me at Starbucks in Times Square at 6 a.m. on Tuesday. And I was like, that sounds awful, but I'm there. So we made a partnership, and he was Italian, and he had this background in shoes, and he was like, do you know anything about how to make shoes? And I was like, everything I know about shoes I learned from people in my workshop. So yes, but also like no. And so he was like, what do you want to do? And I was like, I want to make like a luxury high heel in Africa because I think that they can. We just have to train them. And he was like, and I was like, let's do it. So what we started doing with the UN is basically product development in Italy and then a transfer of knowledge from Italy to a specific workshop in Ethiopia. So we can actually train them every single season on new skills and continue to develop that. So it's a little bit of a departure from where I started with the other workshops in South Africa and Kenya, where it was based on like their traditional skills like beading, weaving, dyeing. But you know, it's great and it's amazing. And ultimately, for us to be able to like start producing more luxury product in Africa, we have to create systems.
And so you talk a lot in the press about knowing your farmers, and I want to get into that a little bit in terms of how do you establish those relationships, and especially when you were working with the farmers in Ethiopia or the artisans in Ethiopia, and basically bringing something from another culture in.
Yeah.
How does that work? How is the communication with the artisans and with the farmers?
Yeah, it's always so different because every single country like goes about things differently, and all the material is like always very different. One very early example I had was with crocodile, and like, you know, my mom is Inuit and Irish, and I was raised in Canada. So while I was vegan for 8 years, fur is a huge part of how I grew up, and a big part of the Inuit communities there. So I have always had like an understanding as well of animal byproduct materials, but crocodile was just one that I couldn't really understand. So I visited this like crocodile farm, which was where, you know, they were mainly getting crocodile from, and just like talked to that family and figured out what their processes were, and, you know, spent a lot of time. You literally just have to go do the work. You just have to physically travel. Like, everyone's like, well, how do you find artisans? I'm like, you have to go. Like, yeah, you can call like these like directories and stuff, but ultimately, like, you're the one that's responsible for the choices that you make. So don't like just rely on someone else to vet that for you always. And also, you want to know. And when people buy my shoes, they buy the shoes or the bags or whatever because they love that product. And it being sustainable is not enough. You know, it's not enough. So the sustainability part of it, you have to be compelled to do that because you love that. And that has to be something that you are willing to travel around Africa to see.
Yeah. And have you had any obstacles with any farmers? Yeah, every day.
You know, last year we lost, you know, a huge batch of our like fall production because there was a state of emergency declared in Ethiopia. You know, what are you supposed to do when you can't gain access to your workshop? And Nordstrom and opening ceremony and all these people are like, but we want our shoes. And I'm like, okay, me too. But like, these people want to live, and like the UN can't get into the workshop. So what do you want me to do? Like, so I think in those moments, you are also tested as a business owner. Your customers are tested because maybe you were pre-ordering it or whatever, and your wholesale accounts, that's who you really know who's going to stick by you, because when that product is 60 days late, are they going to cancel the order, or are they going to still love sustainability and artisans when it means that they're not going to have it in time for like whatever holiday, you know, sale they were trying to do.
So I want to get back to the artisans a little bit more and talk about how you are involved in perhaps preserving their traditions, and also you've talked at some points about empowering them in particular ways. So can you kind of talk a little bit about your mission on that level?
Absolutely. I think for me, you know, I've loved fashion basically since I came out of the womb, and I was just always really thrown off by like, you know, African-inspired prints and that sort of thing. It's like, what is that? And, you know, when Valentino, God love them, like does these like Maasai collections, and it's like beaded in Italy, but like Maasai inspired, it's like, well, why wouldn't you just get the Maasai people to do it? Like, why wouldn't you just involve them? Because when you take references and ideas and imagery from people who are already marginalized, it's like adding insult to injury, and it's also stealing. Like, I don't believe in that. Like, it's a continued oppression. And so just coming to someone and saying, like, I love your culture and I'm inspired by your culture and I want you to help me showcase your culture. I think that that's like empowering and also validating and like the bare minimum that we should be doing as artists.
Okay. I want to follow up with that, and then I'm going to move on to Nairi. You had something stolen from you by Zara.
Yeah.
So talk about the fact that they knocked off one of your shoes.
Yeah.
And when you put it on Instagram, you hashtag stolen from Africa. So can you talk about how that felt like stealing not just from you, but from the artisans that produced it?
Yeah. So we had this shoe last year. We still have it. It's one of my favorite shoes. It's super cute. It's called the Lamu sandal, and it's feathers. It's turkey feathers actually that we have dyed, and it's a cross strap and it's a flat sandal, and it was one of our best-selling sandals. We completely sold out, and then we had like hundreds on pre-order, and just as like it was getting really crazy, that's when in Ethiopia they declared a state of emergency, and like no one could gain access to our workshop, and we were trying to get people in, like we were trying to get stuff to happen, and we're literally like in the thick of it, like every day checking in on everyone, making sure everyone's okay. And then Steve Madden is like, hey, guess what we made? And it was like a replica of these sandals, and they were like $60 or something like that. And it was just like someone had like shot a bullet to my heart and like ripped the carpet from out under me, because I was like, we have these women every single day who are like fighting to try to get to the workshop to do the only job that they've ever had, to make these sandals for these other women who like spent their paychecks on pre-ordering something, and like you're a dick. And my intern was like in Zara and like snapped a picture and sent it to me and was like, dude, what is this? And I was like, whoa. And I just posted it on my Instagram. And I used the hashtag stolen from Africa because that was like what it felt like to me. And it was such a blow. And people are like, well, like flattery is like whatever. No, like it's just bad. And people freaked out, obviously, and our amazing customers and my like amazing, Instagram loyalists like struck back, and like the press caught onto it, and we talked a lot about like what the real impact is of knockoffs. People still do it sometimes.
Yeah.
And I think that we just have to ask ourselves, and it was an important question that came up. Like someone was like, listen, I love fashion and I can't afford $285 sandals. So how am I supposed to participate? Because a lot of times sustainability is like, this like very luxury thing that like not everyone can afford. And my answer to that is like, just because what we make is a certain price point and that may not be accessible to everyone doesn't give other people the right to steal it from me so you can have it. And then we did something with Teen Vogue that was like how to like DIY your own like fuzzy slippers.
Okay, all right.
Because that's always an option.
Okay. I want to switch gears really quickly and awkwardly to Nairi and talk about a really different kind of business model, one that was rooted in venture capitalism. So can you talk a little bit about...
Make me sound like the capitalist and consumer that I am.
So talk a little bit about the inspiration for your brand and how it came to be.
So yes, she gave the game away. I was working in venture capital when I started my company. But I think, the inspiration to go into the fashion industry probably really goes back to my family. I'm the eldest of 4 girls. We're all different shapes and sizes. I am 5'5". My 3 younger sisters are between 5'9" and 5'11". So we're all different shapes and sizes. So any times when we've gone shopping together to find the perfect dress, when we've had to be bridesmaids together, and my 3 siblings have all been married, so I've had to do that 3 times over, a lot more challenges because we're all different shapes and sizes. And so I've felt, you know, as a woman shopping and today's retail landscape, that despite this abundance of options, despite this sort of consumer-driven message that's shoved down our throats to buy this now, buy, there still doesn't seem to be the right thing at the right moment in the right size for me. And so it was sort of with that in mind that I was working in venture in Sydney. I was working for a firm called Spark Capital. My focus, or my vertical focus, was direct-to-consumer e-commerce, direct-to-consumer web applications. And so I was really paid to stay abreast of trends, understand where consumer behaviors were trending, understand what the public markets were doing, and how the venture capital markets were following that in terms of businesses that they were funding. And it was sort of from that backdrop that I stumbled across a really interesting statistic, which was that 50% of women's wear was being cleared at markdown. And that struck me as really an interesting market dynamic, because I thought, well, if that's the case, there must be an imbalance in supply and demand. What's going on? Why do they have to clear 50% of what's produced? And so that caused me to dig a little bit deeper. And at that point, I then discovered, At that point, I then discovered that around 20% of all clothing produced ends up as landfill or is cleared in secondary markets. And you know, you do the basic math and you go 50% is being cleared at markdown, 20% is being destroyed. That means that 30% of women's wear being produced is being sold as it was originally intended. And so I looked across the globe and I said, okay, there's a lot of great, amazing people here right now that are doing amazing things in sustainability, all around how do we produce a better, more sustainable, more environmentally friendly product. But has anyone really looked at how do we correct the supply-demand imbalance? How do we stop the consumerism? How do we stop the mentality of I need more now, I need to buy more disposable clothes? And how do we start to think about what does single-piece manufacturing look like? What would it look like to make to order? And is there a business model, is there a supply chain model that would stack up from a margin perspective and facilitate that? And so that's basically what I set out to do. I set out to build an end-to-end retailing and manufacturing system to make custom, on-demand women's wear. And so that was back in 2014, and here we are in 2017. In that journey, what I decided to do as part of my go-to-market was to build it for myself first. So I said, I'm going to go to China, pair of sneakers. They manufacture the largest exporter of both textiles and finished goods in the garment industry, or in the apparel industry in the world. They have the most sophisticated manufacturing sector in the world as it relates to apparel. I'm going to first deconstruct the supply chain, understand how it works, understand why it works in the way that it does, and understand if single-piece manufacturing is a possibility. And what I guess I discovered in visiting around 120 different factories all the way across China is that indeed there is an enormous amount of wastage in the way that labor is organized. And I realized that typically the garment manufacturing industry has not been adequately incentivized to truly innovate, to truly invest in technology that has technology and software that has the ability to streamline manufacturing such that on-demand manufacturing is actually possible. And so in the process of creating our supply chain, we've also built the world's first direct-to-consumer made-to-order contemporary label. The label is called Fame & Partners. And at this point in time, we are about 12 months away from opening up our technology to others and starting the process of manufacturing on demand for other brands as well.
So can you explain a little bit more about the data and technology? How does it work exactly without giving away the proprietary
Yeah, of course. I'm just worried. Can you guys hear me properly? I feel like I'm going in and out. Oh, okay, cool. Just sounds weird to me. Cool, thanks. Yeah, so I mean, I think that really technology R&D in this category is really expensive. And the reason that it is because I think, and Todd actually raised this, the industry by and large is still very much reliant on skilled labor, or unskilled labor as the case may be. And in fact, mass manufacturing is predicated on this idea that the more you break down each step in the garment construction process, the less skilled labor that you need to do each step, and the more repetitive the individual task can be for each individual worker, and the greater cost efficiencies that will come from that. But I'm sure that you guys would appreciate that's not very fun for the worker. It's pretty soul-destroying to sit there all day, every day, and sew a button on, and get paid nothing for doing it. So really what our technology does is twofold. It really looks at how do you change the typical production line such that you are still exerting the same amount of effort, but with a smaller number of people, and therefore paying each one of those people contributing to the construction of a garment a higher wage, and allowing each of those individual people to undertake a greater variety of different tasks, which leads to greater job satisfaction. And actually, happier people, guess what? Equals greater productivity, equals same cost efficiencies. And so our software and technology really focuses on how do we streamline and scale that process, and how do we scale it out from what we call a pod within a factory to many pods within many factories. And so that is really the software layer of what we're doing. The other part of what we're doing is really hardware. So there are automation steps within our supply chain, and those of you who are familiar or following the way that robotics are advancing, there's really two key pieces of technology that are advancing in parallel to facilitate robotics into the supply chain in a very complex manufacturing step, such as garment construction, and that is the development of artificial intelligence, and in parallel the development of robotics that have the sufficient manual dexterity that they can handle something as complex as a piece of fabric. Unfortunately, we've been able to partner with hardware suppliers to integrate some level of automation into certain steps within our supply chain to, again, offer the kind of cost efficiencies that you would typically see with bulk manufacturing in a typical cut-sew factory. So really, that's the focus of our technology on the supply chain, and I would say that that's really 80% of our engineering team's efforts. On the other side, and I mentioned before that we're very much focused on this end-to-end system. It's not just about manufacturing, it's about retailing as well. Marcy told a great story about, you know, there's obviously growing momentum behind the sustainability effort. But here's the reality, guys. Single-piece garments that are made with different components, garments that don't fit into a typical ERP, into a typical retailer's network, into a typical SKU system, into a typical e-commerce site. Big retailers don't even know how to sell them. They can't sell them. So if you're doing anything custom or made to order, you can't, it's very challenging to work with a typical retail network as you know it today. And so what we've very much focused on is also building infrastructure around that part. What does it look like to customize? How do you create a base SKU and then create thousands of potential options from that? Because guess what? That creates even more efficiency in the product development cycle. Instead of developing 1,000 different items, you're actually developing one item and then the ability to customize that many ways. You're sampling one thing instead of sampling 1,000 things. And so our technology on that side is really called our customization engine. And again, we're in the process of partnering with some really big retailers here in the US and some in Australia, the likes of Nordstrom, Bloomingdale's, Revolve here, and then the likes of Myer in Australia, to roll out what we call our sort of channel widget offering, which helps facilitate with just a few lines of code those retailers offering a custom on-demand product as well.
Can you explain a little bit more how the customization works on Fame and Partners' website?
Yeah, sure. So as I said, you know, what I very quickly realized when I first did that big trip to China, well, actually it was about 6 or 7 trips, is that I would have to create my own brand first. I would have to test and learn with my own brand and my own money before I could hope to ever manufacture in this way for other people. And so, you know, that was really where the Fame and Partners brand was born. Again, I looked at the market and I said, okay, where are the problems in women's wear felt most acutely? Where are the return rates the highest? Where does size and fit matter the most? Where do women really care the most? Where is it a really emotional purchase? And I felt like, you know, special occasion dresses or social occasion dresses was really where those pain points were felt most acutely. It's kind of where customization and personalization would matter the most at a moment special to them. And so really that's what the incarnation of Fame and Partners was about. It was funny, like we launched in March 2014 and we made the fatal error of running a Facebook campaign to the prom market here in the US. And I had 2 interns on customer service. I had about 5 people on the ground in China. And we went from doing $70,000 to $1 million in 30 days. And I think that that just sort of was really testament to the fact that there's a huge demand for personalization in that product category. So the way that customization works now is different to the way that it worked then, and is also different for social occasion dresses than it might be for, say, a jacket or a pair of pants. So these are Fame and Partners that I'm wearing now. But the customization formula that you can see on the site today has been architected based on sort of a couple of key things. Firstly, choice paradox. One of the things that we realized is that women actually don't really want to design, you know, short of it unless you're a fashion designer. They want to be inspired, totally understandable. They want to be inspired and led and then make a few key tweaks to uniquely make it their own. So therefore, you can customize against 4 different attributes. Today, you can choose multiple colors, obviously, fabric, what we call style customization, so things that might be based more on a trend, so it might be add a ruffle or add a bow, or it might make it one shoulder. But the thing that we find the most traction with is what we call fit customizations. So it's really about make it bra friendly, you know, make it big bust friendly, make it small bust friendly, make it hip friendly, so on and so forth. So it's really things that, you know, women know what they love about their bodies and what they want to show off and what they want to cover up, or what makes them feel great about themselves. So it's really facilitating customization at that level so that you're really creating fashion that's inclusive, not exclusive.
Okay, great. Yay. All right. I want to switch to questions. I want to shift over to the audience and see, because otherwise we'll run out of time. So we've got one person down here in the front.
Hi, I am a policy and journalism student, a master's student. My name's Anna. I have a question for both designers. So I noticed on the websites that the shoes range from $285 to $885, and then your dress is around $300, and I totally get it. I'm wondering what you think is a fair developing wage for your workers, and because you guys both live on most of the expensive coasts, New York and Los Angeles, and how much you think is a sustainable wage for them. Can they afford a vacation? Can they come to America if they had the opportunity, if they had the money? And how you guys figure out the wages?
I can answer that. So every country for us in Africa is completely different, and then we also do development in Italy, so that's different. And for me, being one person and like handling that and also auditing that is hard, because a workshop can tell you one thing and you can believe them and you can ask people, but you really need someone else to kind of vet that. And it was important to me that everyone's paid a living wage, not just minimum wage. And I think, you know, Todd spoke really well on that earlier. So we actually have the UN come in and do audits on all of our workshops, and that's how we make sure that everyone's getting a living wage. And that just means that they're able to put away, from the UN standard, they're able to put away 30% in their savings, but also able to afford health care as well as education for anyone in their family, obviously like food and a roof over their head, all of that jazz. Can they afford to come to America? I don't know, probably not. I know a lot of people in America who can't even afford to come to New York, so it sucks for sure. I think one other thing that we try to do is make sure that everyone in our workshops knows how to finish a whole shoe. We've been really fortunate that we've had people leave our workshops and actually start their own companies, and to me, like, that's the biggest win. Because I don't know what could happen to me even tomorrow, and I want to make sure that if I'm not around, that our artisans are going to be able to go off and do something else. And ultimately, an education is the only thing that no one can ever take away from you. So we just try to make sure that education is a big part of the process.
Yeah, I mean, if you want me to add a little color as well. So I've built my system to directly address wage disparity in the apparel industry. If you think about a typical garment, you've got about 20 workers in a production line that would touch that, and then inline QC. So you probably have at least 30 hands individually touching that garment through the full process. My system collects between 4 to 5 workers in individual pods. As a result, each individual worker has the benefit of additional training and upskilling, which therefore means that they have greater job satisfaction, but also that we can pay them more. So workers in our pods and in our factories are paid 2 to 3 times the typical average, which is actually more than the living wage. And it's really through a combination of reorganization of that labor, 1, 2, the training and education system that we've developed and honestly continue to develop. You know, it's constantly working out what is the best optimization of that labor pod. You know, one of the things that we found that was funny that worked super well was we integrated emojis into the interfaces that go through the training system. You know, people found it fun and encouraging and exciting and kind of gamified, I guess, in a way. And so that actually stimulated some of the lower level workers to want to accelerate and become part of a better pod or take a step up even within their little pod. So that's sort of a really big focus for me. You know, one of the things that I'm also focused on is how do we replicate the system in other jurisdictions that might have a higher wage? So what does it look like to bring our system to America? What does it look like to bring our system to Europe? And I don't think we're too far away from cracking that.
Another question? Daniel?
Hi, I'm Daniel. Could I get your names one more time? Just because I can't quite remember everyone's name.
You go first, Marcy.
Marcy.
Todd.
Aurora.
Nairi.
Okay, sorry, I just didn't remember. That's not my question, also. I'm sure all of you guys are well qualified enough to answer this. I'll ask Aurora, though, because you went into visiting all these different African countries and having like your hand involved personally. I wanted to know, like, as an like somebody who wants to design clothes one day, maybe how important it is, like, as a motivating factor to have that kind of skin in the game, to like really go to a factory or a manufacturer and to be able to understand what kind of products that these people continue to make for you and what you're like, how it like ends up affecting the quality of the product as well as your further motivation to continue making the product, whatever it may be, and like finding new kinds of sources to like, you know, have your design made. Does it expedite the process? Sorry,
no,
yeah,
for sure. So when I first started Brother Bellies, there was really only a couple other brands that were on like a high fashion level that were making things in Africa, namely Eden and Suno. And I think what differentiated us was that I actually personally like knew all the people that were making things. And so what I would do every season is basically go to the workshops, see what was around and what was available. Like, hey guys, have you met anyone else interesting, doing anything interesting? And one season it was about bone carving. So someone had collected all the cow bones in Kenya and then was, you know, carving them basically. So I took those and then we were like melting down other things and, you know, had like car tires and all that jazz. And I had everything on the table in front of me and then designed the collection based on what was there. And what they were already doing. So it wasn't like a stretch for them. And they were also adding because they were like, okay, well, what if we, you know, made different sizes of beads out of cow bones? And I think that they had more like, quote unquote, like skin in the game and were more excited and more like inspired to work on the collection because it was so much a part of them as well, versus me just like sending an email from America and being like, I want a silk dress, you know. So I love silk dresses. But that's why I think it was important to actually go, and they know me and they saw the progression, and then they would like see, you know, that sandal in, like, when we were in French Vogue on, like, the last look for the beaded Maasai sandal, they were like, wow, because it was the first time that they were actually, like, included and credited. So I think and it depends on what kind of company you want to have and what size you want to be. But I think that, like, having a personal connection with the people who are essentially making what you're creating, bringing it to life, if you can have a personal connection with people, it's always better. So do it, I'd say, yeah.
Can I make a comment, just a general comment on that? Daniel, I wanted to make a comment on your comment. Yes, I spend an abnormal amount of time in factories seeing how stuff's made, and I would recommend that everybody, as users and buyers of stuff, go see how things are made. And since you're here in LA, there's tons of stuff going on. There's factories that are making, you know, like food products, bath products, clothing products, shaping surfboards, making musical instruments, making, you know, vehicles and all kinds of stuff. And I would just highly recommend anytime you get a chance to go on a factory tour, go on a factory tour. See how things are made. It will change the way that you think about the products that you buy and use. It will make you appreciate all the environmental impacts and the social effort that goes into making stuff, and it'll help you maybe value your stuff more. And ask the people in the factory, like, you know, where's the waste go? Is it compostable? Does it go in a landfill? Can you recycle it? You know, how are things safe in this factory? Like, how do you protect your workers? Where do the inputs come from? Is it sustainably sourced wood or whatever it is? Do you know where it comes from? And I think, you know, see how they answer. I think that will be a really educational experience outside of what you will learn in a classroom, and it will be very helpful in your life.
I want to add one other thing to that too. You know, a couple of things that really kind of opened my eyes. You know, the first time I went to China, and I was sitting on a beach with a girlfriend, and we were having an evening picnic, and she said, "Wow, what a beautiful night! Look at all the stars in the sky." And I looked up, and there were like 2 stars. And I had just come from Oregon, from like a midnight canoe ride, you know, canoeing, and like, if you ever canoed at midnight in Oregon, you know, like the whole sky is nonstop stars. So, you know, I kind of looked at her and I said, wow, you know, I guess everything's relative. And she said, well, the reason there's so many stars out tonight is because the textile factories were closed today. And that was like, whoa. And, you know, and I would say, going back from the beginning of my career, I kind of liken being in the farms with the farmers. It's like water for chocolate. It's like the soul of the brand that I've created. So if, you know, to their points, you know, being sort of at that DNA, at the root, is really where it starts. It's at the source. And I think I make this parallel between the source of our own source inside of us that's waking up and realizing we need to be thinking differently about what we're buying, what we're choosing, what we're putting in and on our bodies, because we're just made of energy and it's just an extension of ourselves. It's that same, you know, metaphorically, it's that which is leading us to want to know the source, the farm to table movement, the farm to fashion movement of where things come from. And so, you know, getting into the trenches on that, I think, is where it has to start if you really, in today's world especially, if you want to build something and learn about what you're really building and why you're building it, so you can communicate that into the world. Down here.
Hi, my name's Lauren. Thank you all for coming tonight. So my question goes to everyone, but would be different for Todd and everyone else. So something I love about Patagonia is that your consumer base, which I identify with, is very environmentally focused because you make gear and merchandise for people who are doing outdoors recreational activities. For you, for lack of a better word, how is that nice working with that consumer basis? And for everyone else, how do you make your customers care?
I'll start. I mean, you're right on. That's the reason why I think the outdoor industry was a little bit on the forefront of this, because we recognize that the customers might actually care. And our core customer base recreates in the outdoors, and if we say, hey, actually making the stuff that you buy might have an impact on the places where you have fun, we could really get them to care about it and act on the information we were giving them.
And the rest of the world?
I'll just say real quickly, I mean, it starts at the product, you know. It starts at, it has to be great product. And if it is, then it's, you know, in my case from the beginning, for the last 20 years, trying to educate people about why they should buy sustainable fashion. It wasn't buy it because it's organic or buy it because it's sustainable. Buy it because it's great product. And oh, by the way, it's also sustainable. It's also organic. It's also ethically made. And it has to be an add-on. It can't be instead of. It's all about no compromise. That's the winning formula in this movement.
I think for us, it's really been about making the story directly relevant to our customers. And so for us, that's really meant a messaging hierarchy where first we focus on the fact that we're personalized, you know, because women feel that pain point directly. And so then they're like, oh, wow, they're personalized. Oh, I can customize it. Oh, okay, right. So that must mean that it's made to order. It's made just for me. Oh, okay, right. That means it's less wasteful. So it's kind of like a sequence of different thoughts that, and I guess a narrative that we put them through. And then I guess that's why we have customers that come back. And that's why that ultimately they're the same customers that ultimately get excited and share our content on social media when we are talking about a sustainable message. So I just think it's an education process. And I think I'd say the same thing as Marcy and Aurora said it before. And I read a quote from Jarl from Reformation just the other day that talked about product. You know, you've got to do great product first because it's fashion. And then, you know, if there's an underlying story with substance, then that really pulls people in. And another brand I want to say that does that in a great way is Everlane.
Yeah. Sorry, Myra.
Hi, I'm Claire. So I don't think I came up with this question. I think it's just the big question across like all sustainability industries, which is how do you make it available to people who can't afford higher prices? Is it technology? And how would technology affect people working in the factories? Is it educating the people in the factories to be able to operate the technology? I don't know. Can you answer?
I mean, I can try and answer that because this is an area that we've been very focused on. So someone over there mentioned that we have like our average price point is actually $250, but call it $300. It's the same. And the reality is, even though that's very competitive for an evening dress or a long maxi dress, it's really unattainable for a lot of people. I mean, if you read surveys about the average median millennial income in the US, it's around $25K per annum. So someone that's earning $25K just can't buy those types of products at all, let alone regularly. So we've been very focused on, okay, the most expensive step in garment construction is actually the labor. And so the more that we can optimize that step, the more that we can bring our costs down. And so predominantly through software, and what that means is not less people that have jobs, just that we have a far better optimization of the tasks those people are undertaking each time they construct something. Through software, we now have a path to launching our next iteration of our manufacturing platform that will see us being able to manufacture items for around $30. Which would mean that we could retail those items for around $100. So it's between $80 to $100, depending if we're retailing it directly ourselves or depending if we're retailing it through a retail partner. And so I feel like, so it's a great question. And I think that the answer then is through technology. Now, unfortunately, technology is a double-edged sword. So obviously our system is very focused on labor optimization. By default, it's about the people. But automation is something that, you know, is going to affect every single industry on the face of the planet. And I do think that, you know, further automation within the factory through advanced robotics is not as far away as everyone thinks. So obviously integration of that into the factory will also bring costs down. But unfortunately, I think it's going to mean a displacement of labor at the same time. Haven't solved that one yet.
Yeah, I was going to say.
And I just want to add, you know, and I mentioned this earlier, but, you know, my career, I've really spent trying to create efficiencies in the supply chain in order to make sustainable fashion accessible. Now we have to retrain consumers from the faster, cheaper, more mentality. Obviously, that is broken, right? But if you look at a typical garment, it can change hands 7 to 10 times, and many of those hand changes include someone in the middle marking it up. There's a lot of inefficiency through markups. So if you can build your supply chain up from the beginning up, you can cut all that excess out. You can be competitive at the end of the day at price, and you can add a lot of value and pay your workers and your farmers more money. And that's always been my model, which is what's enabled me to launch at places like Bed Bath & Beyond, Macy's, and Target.
I mean, I might actually add something to what Marcy just said as well, and share a quote that I love from one of the most amazing design companies in the world, Vitzo. So they make incredible furniture and an utter dedication to quality, and they're really expensive. So to buy a shelving system is like $8,000, but they last a lifetime. And the MD, Mark Adams, sort of has this infamous quote, which is, "We can't not afford to buy quality." No, we can't afford not to buy quality. And I guess what he means by that is, you know, let's move away from this disposable culture. Let's invest into quality pieces, whether it's furniture, whether it's fashion. It's all about less is more. And I mean, to that end as well, there's a really great documentary called Minimalism. And I think that there's a real movement around this that is about that. It's more about wardrobe capsules. It's more about pieces that are interchangeable and mix and match, and less about buying into the Zara-like consumer economy that says, buy this thing and throw it away tomorrow, because if you don't, then you'll suffer social media suicide.
I think if I could just add something for us, like, it's so much about the whole way that you go about designing, and we don't believe in sales. So I never put our shoes on sale. So therefore, like, I know that I'm not going to have to worry about that markdown that's going to happen where I'm going to lose a bunch of money. And the way that we try to talk to our customers is like, you don't have to buy something completely new every single season. And like, we are going to make sure that we design things that are going to have longevity, and we're still going to be as excited about the shoes from spring summer 2014 as we are now. And if you had those in 2014, you're really lucky because they're actually better now. So I think it's like the whole philosophy behind it that we've been trying to change. And I know that we're not going to be able to automate my product because it's so specific. And you know, it's for us about job creation. So I think it's just about like buying smarter and like taking the stress off of people to make them feel like they always have to be getting new stuff all the time.
Maybe a riff off of that is to say that, you know, quality is an environmental attribute, something that lasts longer and doesn't need to be replaced as often, is going to overall have a lower impact, as opposed to something that takes the same resources to produce and you need to produce it more often. One of the disrupting ideas in the marketplace right now is the sharing economy. So if you have a lot of durable products that potentially are not being used right now, or idle assets, why not share them with other people? That tends to drive down the cost model so that people can afford more nice stuff than they could if they had to buy and own it. So Patagonia launched a worn wear program, which is all about repairing old garments, buying back old garments and rejuvenating them and reselling them. And part of that is actually teaching people how to fix stuff, getting people involved in the design of how they fix their things or how they personalize their things. So it has a lot of positive benefits, and overall we see it lowering the cost of ownership and using of clothing, which is great. It's bringing in new people who before were like, oh, maybe I can't, you know, buy that thing new, but now they have opportunity to do that. So.
And just adding on, one of my favorite companies out there today is Rent the Runway. What an incredible business model, right? It's building on that.
One more question. And they'll stay for the reception so you can chat with them some more, but yeah. Down here. Sorry, Mara.
That's okay.
Hi, I have a question for Marcy and Todd, but Aurora and I, please feel free to jump in. So you guys talked about recycling materials and textiles and about using recycled materials for your products. I'm thinking when a person is done with their clothes, most of them just donate to donation centers, thrift stores, secondhand shops, whatnot. But even these shops can't take the enormous amount of clothes that they get, and it all will just end up in the landfill anyway. So is there a way for a designer to grab hold of textiles that will become waste? And does it take a partnership with an institution or like a government agency in order to handle this waste appropriately? And how would you go about that?
So I'll just speak to a couple of innovations around that are happening. Number one, there's a company called ICO that is putting boxes out at stores even like H&M. And they're saying, bring back your apparel. It doesn't have to be H&M apparel. And they're then sorting and identifying what can be remade, what is, what can actually go into being recycled, and then what is going to end up in like insulation. It's just not going to turn into clothing anymore. And there are many innovations around that are going on in terms of collecting clothing, and even down to collecting scraps at factories. There's a lot of innovation around that too in terms of recycling. There's a company called Recover that is sorting also by color, and then they're making yarn out of scraps from factories all over the world. But in terms of clothing itself, ICO is just one of many companies now that are starting to collect clothing and break it down using their equipment and turning it into, selling it off to turn it into new yarns or new fabrics. Reformation, downtown LA, I mean, they're doing a great job of breaking down, buying old fabrics. So there's lots of stuff out there now around that.
Yeah, I would just add that the big thrift companies like the Salvation Army and Goodwill report where their stuff goes, and most of it ends up going into a similar place where ICO is sending their stuff into big factories where they're sorting out the clothes, and the main market is for resale in developing countries. So that's where most of it goes, and then whatever can't go into that market will get recycled. And there's priorities of what, there's a market for cutting cotton t-shirts into squares and using it for factory wipers, and they can make a little bit of money off of that, great. But then there's some stuff that doesn't really have a market for. So identifying what could we do with those things, how could we be innovative about, can we grind it up and make it into insulation and stuff like that, is a little bit where H&M has worked on that with ICO, and there's ideas of how do you explode a shoe into different components and then melt them back down and do stuff with them. So Nike did a really cool project with regrinding shoe components and putting it sometimes back into their products, sometimes into insulation, sometimes into actual athletic running tracks and stuff like that. So there's ideas out there and there's opportunities. I think if you're a designer that wants to get a hold of used materials, then maybe it's a different approach, and maybe it's going to where you see waste being produced and finding out, finding one that has waste that you can use. And so we work with companies that will go out to factories and source particular types of scraps so that we've got the right materials and the right colors. Pretty consistently, they can shred them, blend them into yarns, and you're designing it from the beginning to get something that you want out. Because if you're taking trash, you're going to put a lot of effort, money, energy, and resources into making the trash into something. You want to make sure it's a good something and something that somebody's going to buy. And it's a relatively good quality thing. So just recycling for the sake of recycling, maybe not a good idea. But identifying a waste stream that can actually be an input for something you want to make would be the ideal.
Check out Zero Waste Daniel. The jacket I'm wearing that's down there is just like that. He buys a lot of old clothes as well as scraps. He gets scraps donated, and he makes everything out of waste.
And he's an interesting, eccentric guy, right, too?
He's a great guy. Good guy.
So I want us to have time for our reception. I want to thank our guests tonight. This is a really complex topic with a lot of moving parts, and I think they all offered us a different kind of lens into the topic. And I think they also offered us a kind of optimism. They all approach this from a kind of optimistic perspective about how we can see change in the future of fashion. So I want to thank everyone for coming, and please join us upstairs for the reception.
Thank you.